computer. So I am speaking with one, two, three, four, five members of the cast of Bernstein's Mass back from 2011, and our director, our stage director, Greg Hellems. So why don't we just go around the screen, so to speak, but I know no, everyone doesn't see the same screen that I see. And why don't you all introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, and also tell us how you're doing and where you are living now, and just a little bit about how life is going for you now in 2020. So in the upper left of my screen, I have Samantha, so let's start with her.
Okay, hi, I'm Samantha Helmstetter, and I am currently in New Orleans right now, but I live in New York, and I am currently in the basement apartment of my parents' new house that they just bought, and we basically put all of our old house furniture because they wanted new furniture, so I got all the old house furniture, which is pretty nice, I'm not gonna lie. So I've been here since I think March. My parents were like, you need to get out of New York for a while. But since graduating undergrad, I did my master's in voice performance at CCPA in Chicago. And then from there, I moved to New York. And my most recent project, I did an 8-month stint as a cast singer on a cruise ship. I was just telling Neal, right before all of this madness started, I think 3 months prior to was when I got off. So got up in the nick of time. But yeah, that's been me lately.
That's great to see you again. And next on my view would be Molly. So Molly, give us your quick introduction.
Sure. I'm Molly Bombonato, so happy to be here and reminisce with all of you all. I am currently in Arkansas. I have switched gears a little bit. I'm getting 2 master's degrees right now, one in business and one in public service. Hoping to make an impact in whatever I do, but still staying involved in the arts, teaching at Arkansas Rep here as well. But it's slowed down a little bit as with most things have. So yeah, I'm excited to hear about everyone else.
And Vanessa?
Yeah, hi, I'm Vanessa Owen. Since Bernstein's Mass, I kind of hopped all over the country dancing. I lived for quite a while in Washington, D.C. and worked with a company there where we did State Department tours and for cultural diplomacy. And then about 2 years ago, I moved to Asheville, North Carolina with my now husband, Gavin Stewart, and we co-found and direct a small project dance company here. And as of yesterday, we just finished up doing a weekend of drive-in dance performances, which is something new that we've been exploring since the pandemic. So excuse me if I'm a little dehydrated and woozy today. It's been a wild ride.
Let's see, next I see Shawn. So Shawn, fill us in.
Hi, I'm Shawn Storms. I'm currently back in Ohio, was in New York for a while with my husband, Zach Brown. Did a lot of regional work, did some work in Seattle, did some work in Jersey. Did a lot of teaching. I worked for 4 years at a children's theater, and I worked for 1 semester at MAP at Wright State. So that was fun. And now I'm currently in the middle of a podcast project. So we've recorded the first couple episodes, and it's discussing problematic art and artists and whether or not we can separate the problematic nature of those people and projects from their cultural impact. So it's not light stuff. So there's a lot of research, but it's very cool connecting with different guests from across the country. So trying a new media format. So yeah.
Okay, so before we continue going around the horn, so to speak, you have to toot your own horn. So what's the name of the podcast and where can we get it? You're too modest, Shawn.
It's called Ain't It Problematic? And it's going to be on Spotify by the end of the month.
Cool.
Yeah.
I will make sure to check it out.
Thank you.
And Drew, you look like you're up in my lineup there.
Hey, I'm Drew Mizer Helton. I live in New York. We're bracing down for this hurricane that I guess is coming in about 4 seconds. So fingers crossed.
And can you say its name correctly?
I can't. I actually didn't even know it was happening. I saw on my weather app, I was like, oh, it's going to be a bad storm. And my wife said, yeah, it's a hurricane. And so this is all new information for me. So
I think it's Isaias or something like that. But
whatever it is, it's coming.
It's coming.
We are, I have bottles of water ready to go, just in case. I, right out of college, well, after Mass, I believe I was a junior, so maybe a sophomore. So I had 1 or 2 years left in the program. And then after that, I did some professional gigs around the area in Dayton, and then did a couple of gigs here and there, came to New York, did a kids tour of Curious George for 9 months, came back and took a little bit of a direction change, kind of like Molly. And now I am the assistant house manager of Studio 54, Roundabout Theater Company house manager. And right now just hoping this sickness in the world calms down so that I can get back to work. And my wife works for Times Square Alliance. And so we're very much still involved with the arts and seeing everything and doing everything. And we're in the scene, in the now. So that's what I'm doing.
Last but not least is Greg. So Greg, fill us in.
I'm currently in my studio, which used to be my dining room, but now it's my studio where I teach dance and movement and acting. And that's here in Dayton. And I am now the head of musical theater at Wright State, which I was just faculty when we were doing this back in 2011. And I'm living in Dayton still, teaching and living in Dayton, and staying busy.
So Greg, I'm actually going to start with you because I have this sheet here. I went through my file and I found all kinds of things, including my kazoo that I used, and it still doesn't really work that well. But that was my Mass kazoo, and I found this sheet of paper because I remember at the time I thought this was just so interesting, that one of the first things you did with all of the singing and dancing actors who are in the street chorus was you had them figure out who they were and what their backstory was. And I have this printout here. So I'll say who was who. Molly is down as a Sarah Palin wannabe. That's what it says. Let's see, Shawn, retail manager / urban / sexy. Drew, doctor. Samantha, elementary school teacher. And is there anyone I forgot? Do I have everyone there?
Yes, I don't know if I did that.
No,
I don't know if
we didn't have one. We didn't have one. But so Greg, what I wanted to ask you is, what was your, because I thought that was so cool because we had this mass of people, and obviously you want them not just to be a chorus of people. You want them to be real people who are participating in this thing. So what was your strategy in doing that, and is that something that you use in other shows just as a way to create character? Or tell us a little bit about how that worked, because it worked great.
I don't usually ask actors to write out a backstory because I know they generally do that on their own. But one of the things that I thought about in this production in particular, after we literally had 2 years of pre-production before we even got into rehearsal. But what I wanted to do was I wanted the show to somehow reflect Dayton and the time period we were living in, because I thought a lot of the story of mass, at least of the street singers, was about how everyday people engage this idea of spirit or this idea of a spiritual life. So, so that was a way of trying to find very distinct personalities. So we were representing a broad spectrum of kinds of people that we would meet in Dayton or that we would meet in 2011. And I do remember this. I remember we talked about the dancers as being symbolic, a spiritual representation of what's happening. So the dancers were working at one aspect of expression, and then the singers of the chorus, the street chorus, was acting sort of in another mode of operation. So we have these different levels of storytelling going on. But I thought that was one way to try to costume, be specific in that sense, have identities that felt unique in relationship to the celebrant, and also represent Dayton.
Now you mentioned the dancers, and Vanessa, your role as one of the dancers in the ensemble was special because you were the dancer who Gina Walter, the choreographer, identified as the sort of dance partner or equivalent or dance mirror, you might say, to John Wright, our celebrant. So what was that like, the notion of sort of being I suppose you could say, the spirit animal in a way of this other person in the role? So, you're a woman, he's a man, you're of two different ages. How did you approach that as a character and as an actor, and also as a dancer? What was that like to be portraying someone else who was also on stage at the same time?
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know if I had this realization at the time, but now thinking on it, I think this is a really special thing about dance, is that movement can be like very genderless, and all the things that make up identity don't necessarily hold true when it comes to how we move. And so I really think like dance is a very cool vessel for like sharing common ground between different kinds of people. And I don't remember feeling like it was odd to be representing someone who didn't look anything like me or sound anything like me. I think dance just kind of tends to, especially contemporary dance, which it was, tends to kind of like transcend those notions, at least emotionally. And I thought it was like a really unique challenge because I didn't have, as I recall, I didn't have a backstory. My whole story was his story. So I really liked that. It kind of like offloaded some of the pressure almost. Like you just tune into what someone else's experience is and use that to guide you. And so I think that was like really fun for me. But I remember that musically, it was very challenging for me to dance in mass. I remember that everything felt unexpected about the music, and that Gina and I would have these rehearsals, like we scheduled extra rehearsals for some of my solos because I just could not like figure out some of the timing. It was super tricky. Yeah, so it was a really good challenge.
Well, some of Lenny's favorite meters have odd numbers of beats in them where we have even numbers of limbs, and I'm sure it makes it interesting when you're a dancer, not just for you, but for the people in the street chorus who had a lot of dancing to do as well. I think it's interesting with Samantha and Molly and Shawn, each had sort of a number that was their star turn in the show, because it's an interesting show because you have a large cast, and you have the celebrant who is obviously sings not quite the whole time, but he's the center of attention and the main character. But then several of the people from within the chorus each have a moment where they sort of reveal their story. And the three of you had that opportunity. So how did that feel? And, you know, how did those songs that you sang, you know, what kind of buttons did they hit for you? And is, you know, are these songs that you still remember, or is it just a song you sang in a show a year, you know, a long, long time ago, and there have been many other roles and things you've done in the past? Is it something that stuck with you? I'm just curious to know. So, any of you?
I think what I really enjoyed about, and yes, I do still remember the song. It's very hummable, so I quite liked it. But what I thought was really interesting, because I was an elementary school teacher, there's sort of this persona or like stereotype around an elementary school teacher to be very put together and sweet and warm and welcoming. And then to contrast that with my song, which was, you know, she's very questioning and perhaps very tormented by her changing belief or her resistance to belief or spirituality. So that was a really fun objective to play against, character-wise. And I just thought it gave the character a lot more dimension.
Molly, you had one of the really hard songs, Hurry, that just goes all over the place note-wise.
Yes, like Vanessa, I remember being like, what is going on with this music? So I think that I will never forget my little ditty that I sang. It was so interesting. I think just throughout the process, it took me a long time to be like, what is this? What is going on? And I don't think I loved like having the backstory to fill those sort of moments in, but I don't think I fully like immersed myself in it until we got on stage and until we saw the whole thing put together with all of the musicians. I was like, wow, oh my goodness, this is so powerful. I don't think I've ever sung with that many musicians and probably never will again. And it was just such a magical experience to be able to do that. And the fact that we had done like the backstory work really just like brought that much like power to it for me. And I was like, oh, okay, like now I understand how this works. And I was definitely amazed by the process and just getting to be a part of it all.
It's kind of interesting you said that, because my experience with Mass kind of paralleled yours, because I first experienced it when I was a freshman in college and was playing in the orchestra in a production. And I had exactly that same experience, because at the first rehearsal, it was just the orchestra playing the music. And I was like, what is this? I mean, there were some things in it that were kind of cool, but it didn't really make sense. And then, you know, then the next rehearsal, we started to have the singers join us. And then by the third rehearsal and the dress rehearsal, it's like, oh my God, this thing is amazing. So I just find it interesting that you had the exact same experience that I did.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Shawn, you as I recall, you brought the house down with the blues number. It looked like you were having the time of your life singing that song. I hope that was true.
I was. I don't remember the song anymore, I have to admit, but I remember the feeling it gave me, that it was a nice bookend to, I guess, my experience at Wright State, to leave on that note. And having performed at the Schuster prior to Mass, it was sort of like a come home type of feeling. It felt like, hi, I haven't been here for a few years. It's nice to be back. I really was drawn to all of the music. I like complex rhythms and challenging melodies. I really love Brecht and I love Sondheim, and I love how it, doesn't necessarily feel like it should go this way and then it makes a left. I love the unpredictable nature of the piece. So I was very grateful to be a part of it. And I think coming from a background as a dancer previously to being at Wright State, it was sort of like the marriage of all of my experiences at the same time. It was the acting, it was dancing in a pedestrian way, it was dealing with complex melodies and rhythms, and it was just something that I never get to do again, and I'm very grateful for.
It's cool that you say that, because I mean, from what I know of the piece, which is more than a little, that's kind of what it was for Bernstein, that it was the piece where he sort of brought all these different things together, different elements of the kind of music that he liked, and this notion that there shouldn't be any separation between the types of music. It should all flow together. So it kind of mirrors the experience that you had there.
And it was lovely, because my first show at Wright State was with Greg, and my last show at Wright State was with Greg. So it was nice. It was nice having bookends all over. It just was a nice bow at the end of my experience.
I'm just curious to know memories that any of you have of the show, of the experience. Drew, you got your hand up in the air. Go.
I have input on this. I have input. So I figured out I was a sophomore when I was doing this show. I think it was the end of my sophomore year. And I just remember being in the rehearsal room with both of you and Gina and, well, everyone here, but specifically like Neal and Greg and Gina, trying to sort through this piece and being on the other end of that, being like the pawn. And I remember not like trying to grasp what the piece was in my head, just because, this isn't your typical musical theater piece, but it's also not your typical like classical piece either. So I couldn't really get my head around what it was, and trying to figure out where the cohesion was going to happen. And then we finally got the show together, and I remember we did a lot of the rehearsals without the celebrant in the room. Like, he came in way later and it was awesome, but once we added that, I said, oh, okay, well, that's another piece that makes a lot of this a lot more clear. And then we went to the Schuster, and then it became about, okay, well, let's slam all this together. And, we're going to have a jazz band on one side and a rock band on the other side. And the chorus is going to be back on these bleachers, and you guys are going to be all over the place. And the dance corps is going to be here, and blah, blah, blah. And then it became this other beast, and my brain just kind of freaked out again and was like, wait, what is this? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And, now, was it 9 years later, I'm still, every now and again, I'll break out a recording of it just on, iTunes or whatever. And I'm still trying to piece the show together, because it still has so many like minuscule messages in it, as well as the broader like religious overtones of it, but it has small, intimate messages about people and how people interact with each other and the questions that people face day to day, not necessarily with like a higher being, but just kind of in how they exist to begin with. And it's very interesting that I still kind of have the same questions now that I had then. I think it's a piece and an experience of a piece that is always available to dig into again. And especially having been in it, to be able to now dig into it and be like, okay, so then if I remember, we did this in this moment. What was that moment really about? So yeah, so I'm still dissecting it and still trying to figure it out.
Well, I think this spins perfectly back onto Greg Hellems, because you and Gina Walter had, with me a little bit, but mostly you, had the responsibility for taking this completely out there, all over the place kind of a piece. The definition, I think, of unruly, but in a good sense, and shaping it into something and figuring out how to employ all of the talents of our performers to turn it into a really powerful and convincing experience, which it was. How do you do that? Because obviously there's some shows, I would imagine, where the show pretty much tells you what to do. But this is one, I think, where you really have to figure out just what the hell is it and how do you make it work. So how did you do that? What were some of the things that some of the hoops you had to jump through to get to that answer?
I was going to say, when I figure it out, I'll let you know. Because it's not story oriented, we're not working really linearly in the way that we're telling the story. It's much more an expression of a kind of angst and complicated relationship that we have with each other and with what we see as our spiritual relationship to whatever we see as a higher power. That's different for all different people, and that, honestly, that was my take on the piece. That it was about how people have very complex relationships with their spiritual life and therefore with their actual day-to-day life. I think in the process of talking about it, and luckily we had the time to really decide what we thought the pieces of the puzzle. That's where we started to think about, well, why is it divided up into all these different kinds of expressions? So we have the children's choir, and we have the chorus, we have all the different, we have the orchestra and the jazz band and the rock band, we have the street singers, we have the celebrants and the dancers. Like, why is it all of these things? And so, it came down to what do they represent in the relationship? And as we talk about the bigger expression, who are they? And so what will be their part of the story? What will be the part that they tell? I felt like everybody that was working on the project had some sense of at least what was important and what we were trying to do. And I just had to trust that a lot. Because we wouldn't really know until we got to the Schuster what it was all going to be like. At least we did have some rehearsals with the dancers and the street singers and the children's choir before we were able to add John in. Because I think John didn't come in until literally the week before we did the show. So he was only really in rehearsal with us for maybe 3 days before we actually got in front of audiences. So that was crazy. But and that was also another reason why we were going to be restricted in how much John could do. We had to keep his blocking simple. It couldn't be complicated. And that's why we came up with this idea that Vanessa would be the sort of the spirit of his relationship, so that we had another layer of expression that would come through movement while he was singing. So that really became the impetus, was trying to figure out how we were going to use all these different pieces to represent different aspects of the relationship. Everybody on that team was really amazing, and the cast really just jumped in. And I understand like what Drew's talking about. To a great degree, you look at the piece and you're just like, what is this story? Like, what are we talking about? And so I tried to stay away from this idea that we were going to try to tell a story as much as we were going to try to express a really deep conflict that exists in all people and how this group of people negotiate through it. And I think that's, what we were saying earlier about the complexity of the music and this idea of personality representing one face in public, but also having this internal conflict that's of a spiritual nature that we don't always reveal to each other. I thought that was embedded in the nature of the piece, and I think maybe part of Lenny's journey too. Like, what is my relationship in terms of what I think of God, or what do I think of myself as being a spiritual being?
One of the most striking images that still sticks with me all these years later, Greg, is the beginning of the piece. So this is a little bit unfair for our audience, because our audience is going to experience this piece just as an audio recording of the performance. But at the beginning of the piece, what you hear is these four wild and crazy settings of, and John Wright, our celebrant, has checked in.
Sorry to be tardy. I am in the middle of baking a cake.
Perfectly understandable.
Best excuse.
Are you going to cut slices for us and put them in front of the camera so we can imagine we're eating them?
I will not do that.
Okay.
Only because it'll be too hot to cut. Otherwise, I would. You all are beautiful. It's so great to see you.
As are you.
Thank you.
So Greg, I was in the middle of asking you about the beginning of the piece, when we hear these crazy settings that Lenny concocted of the Kyrie and Christe liaison, just dissonant, wild, crazy music, four different things going on at once, from four different, in his conception, four different speakers from the corners of the auditorium. And you came up with this just incredibly striking image of the members of the cast walking along the stage at their own speed, in their own path. And it was just this kind of chaos of urban life. And I just remember as a conductor, someone who directs people, but in a different medium, thinking, this is just amazing to watch this thing come together, and to have all of the members of the cast figuring out, I mean, it was so complicated, but it just absolutely worked. And it gave people a way to experience the craziness of the music, I think, because I think Lenny just imagined it as just being a musical moment. And then the celebrant strums the guitar and says, no, sing God a simple song, none of this crazy business. But you came up with such an just amazing visual version of the music, and it was just great. Were you lying in bed thinking, what the hell am I going to do with this? And then suddenly you had this vision of chaos? So I'm just curious how you came up with it. I'm curious how the cast members dealt with it and managed to pull it off. You're laughing.
I have to ask them, because I know to put that together was very time consuming, and yeah, because that had to be constructed piece by piece, and how we decided to add people in to make sure that the trafficking of that made sense, and that the flow of it made sense, and that there were interactions. It still came back to that original thought about, well, what is that the piece is about, this conflict. And so to me, that was the first idea that came into my mind. Was I listened to that beginning and I thought, that is us in the darkness. That is us, bouncing into the wall and running into each other, and the traffic of everyday life that's just confusion. And that we're so obsessed with just what's happening to me right now, today, no sense of a bigger picture. It's strange that I thought it was very timely in 2011, and wow, even more so now. So, but that was the first image that I had, this idea of what it would be like to see people on the street ignoring each other, not really aware of each other, aware of themselves, aware of anything other than today's another work day. Got to get to work, got to do this, got to get to the bank, whatever it is that they were doing. And that was my idea.
I think one reason maybe why it was so effective is that, part part of, as I see it anyway, part of what Mass is all about is that relationship between a leader and the followers. And the notion that you created in that opening image was a sort of physical representation before our very eyes of alienation and lack of connection. And then John strums the guitar and says, "Sing God a simple song." And it's a message which you could just imagine how someone would hear that and think, oh, yeah, that's the answer of, turn to simplicity. And it just worked. It was, I think, just an incredibly compelling way to start the piece and involve the audience in a way that would both stimulate them and frustrate them, because they were probably thinking, what is this? Certainly the music is, what is this? And then John comes in and says, in effect, I don't know what that was, but that ain't the way it's supposed to be. It should be completely different from that. And then that's what sets things off. And you can see how if someone had that message, that a really alienated person would just suddenly say, yes, that's what I need. You're going to pull me out of this. And then it becomes the story of how the followers become this burden on the leader, which Lenny as a conductor probably felt.
Yeah, I like the idea that actually when the celebrant comes in, that he speaks that word to people that don't know that they can, people that know that they can but have forgotten, or people that think that they're doing it right and don't recognize that they're doing it wrong, or that they've made it more complicated than it needs to be. And I thought that's what I wanted to address, that we all think we're all coming at this from such a different perspective, and none of us are getting it right.
John,
Yes, sir.
you have your own moment in the spotlight of our just one-on-one interview, but now you're here amongst your fellow cast members. Do you have any particular memories and thoughts about the show to share with them, especially when we have Vanessa, who is your dancing alter ego here? So it's kind of nice to have the two of you screen by screen, as it were.
Yeah, so, it's a little bit like when you have a sibling that you're connected to. I feel connected to Vanessa forever. And it's such a wonderful memory that I carry with me. First of all, I want to say, if you're talking about the chaos, and I tell you, what a cool thing to be the one walking among that, to get to be the one to reflect the groundedness and the peace. It was very, very cool. But I just, it was such a privilege to get to witness a lot of what the Celebrant does is listen and observe. That's what you try to be good actors. Good actors listen well and they observe well. And I got the opportunity to experience your messages and your voices every night, and it was a privilege.
I remember from a practical standpoint too, just figuring out, if I'm not mistaken, I think Greg had us, like, we had to figure out when our entrances were to come in for that. And we were trying to, I think Greg was like, okay, you hear that little tiny little flute over there? That's you.
Yeah.
Or like, you hear that like timpani? That, no, don't go on the first one, go on the second one. I just remember trying to like really thread that needle, and it all suddenly worked. It was very cool. It was very cool to experience.
That was a God thing, because it wasn't me.
It was a divine intervention.
I remember us working on that the most.
Yeah.
is that opening. I remember that rehearsal time was very long. But it was cool, kind of circling back to what you said about, everyone is sort of traveling in their own space. They're not aware of the bigger picture. I kind of had my own sort of revelation with that, being the oldest of the street singers, having not worked with many of the people who are cast as a street singer since I was, at the end of my journey, and a lot of them were at the beginning. It was finding out how that marriage worked in terms of all of the different people at different levels. We all come in at a different way. So that was a super eye-opening experience for me, working with people that I hadn't really worked with ever. So that was exciting, to just work with new people that I'm familiar with their work, but not necessarily how we relate to each other. And so I like the fact that while it was frustrating at times, I think going over the beginning is really what gelled everyone together. I think without all of that work, it wouldn't have worked later on in the piece. Like putting in the time and energy into that beginning part and seeing how we don't connect and how those misses or collisions happen sort of morph into a more fluid way of being on stage.
Yeah, I remember similar, Shawn. I remember that a lot of the dancers, we didn't know a lot of the cast, because the dance department at Wright State's kind of its own bubble. And so I remember at the beginning of the process, Greg, you had us, before we began rehearsals, just doing viewpoints and just like finding ways to communicate physically with each other among the cast. And I don't remember like who all was part of that process, but it was definitely not just the dancers. And it just kind of put us all at ease, like we were all speaking the same language, the actors, the singers, the dancers, and I think that's the only process I've had like that in my life, actually, because I've been just pretty much doing dance ever since. But I think about it like all the time. I bring up that process to my husband and my collaborator all the time. And it was really like impactful especially for all the dancers. It was like, it was our language because we were movers, but it was totally different because we were interacting with different people who were focused towards different ways of expressing on stage. And there, it just kind of brought this sense about that the show was, there was just this ongoing sense that the show was about so much more than each of us as individuals. There were so many puzzle pieces and so many different kinds of ages and styles of expression all coming together into this giant production. And I think we were all confused for a lot of it, like Drew had mentioned, but it felt like everybody understood that it was important to like come together for something bigger than ourselves. And it was just very special.
And, Bernstein himself says it in the subtitle of the piece. He called it Mass, a theater piece for singers, actors, and dancers. And I think there's really something fundamentally true there, that he was thinking about each of those professional and disciplinary components of it, that there would be people who are singers, there would be people who are actors, and there would be people who are dancers. But by participating in the piece, the actors would become dancers and the singers would become actors and the dancers would become singers, though I don't know if we ever had you. I think you did a little bit of singing or maybe lip syncing along here and there. But I think he intended to take these different tribes of the performing arts and put them together in the piece in the same way he was taking the different styles of music and putting them together in this quilt that he was putting together. The metaphors are getting a little bit strained, but but I think you know what I mean. And I've always thought that that subtitle, you know, because he could have called it, you know, Mass, uh, a dramatic reinterpretation of the Catholic liturgy or something like that. But he just called it a theater piece for singers, actors, and dancers. And I think there's something very important about that statement.
The audience has to imagine with you, and that's what happens, you know, in this piece. That's what had to happen, because there isn't a through line in that, you know, there's a direction that tells you to do this now and this now and this now. So that's the eclecticism forced us to imagine, and that was a beautiful thing.
So I think maybe this is the time I should ask if anyone has some valedictory or wrap-up thoughts that you want to share. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us. I'll just open the floor for anyone who wants to say something.
As challenging as the process was, and I knew it was going to be challenging because of how we were doing it, that this was a co-production and that this was happening in the middle of a normal production season for us at Wright State. But I thought it was very important that we put our best foot forward, and I was very happy with casting. So you all should know that I was very happy with casting. But I felt, and in thinking about this rebroadcast, I really felt like we accomplished what I hoped we would, which was essentially to put up a mirror for the people of Dayton and the people of the community to say, have you thought about this? Do you consider this? Do we treat each other well? Do we live the life that we should be living? Do we aspire to something more? And as crazy, I agree with you, Drew. Like I had an idea of like how things felt, but I really had no idea how it was going to look until we got into the Schuster. And even then I was fingers crossed. Okay, I hope that everything just flows the way it should. But I think everybody, you know, particularly Neal, under Neal's baton and your vision and your love of the piece, I think that really infected all of us. And I think you at the podium, I think your passion really helped instill kind of a sense of unity that I think did bring the piece together. It is still one of my favorite things that I've ever done. And I want to do it again.
Amen.
So I will second that with 3 glasses of wine. You all, I don't know if you're aware how to what extent you all changed my life. You secured my job. You seriously changed my life. It was before this show, I was called into the provost's office at my university, and very kindly the provost said, you know, we really do want you to finish your doctorate, and it's really at the point where you really need to finish your doctorate. And so after the experience with the Celebrant, I knew what I was going to write about. So I wrote my dissertation on the music and the role of the Celebrant, and so you all changed my life in more ways than you know, and I finished it.
Made you a doctor.
So thank you.
I'll just say one of the most interesting discussions I had was actually with my mom, who she was the only audience member in my family that came to come see it. And, you know, I didn't know how the show was going to be perceived in a lot of ways. And I didn't give her any lead up to it. I just said, we're doing the show. We've got a lot of musicians, a lot of actors on stage. I'd like to know what you think about it. And I remember walking to meet her after the show, and she was so moved, and she was still, I don't know if she's gonna listen to this, she might not like that I'm saying this, but she was still really emotional from her experience. And you know, I think that maybe I took for granted how powerful this piece could be. And you know, seeing her move that way just validated it all the more. And so, yeah, I'll definitely never forget that experience. It meant a lot.
That piece came at a very particular time in my life. During the rehearsal process, my grandfather died. So it was a very emotional time for me. And I had some personal, you know, grievances with my spirituality at that time. So that piece really came at a seminal moment in my journey. And it's something that I'm incredibly grateful for, as an outlet to work out my own issues, as well as being able to be creative in a productive and healthy way, being able to channel that energy through the piece. So I'm incredibly grateful. And it was sort of a way for me to say goodbye to him. My family had worked for the Victoria Theater Association, so it was the Schuster was a place that he frequented. So it was a nice way to sort of commune with everybody, sort of settle in my own grieving and spiritual journey, and also a way to say goodbye. So I'm very grateful for the experience.
Yes, Neal, thank you for suggesting that we do this and for being such an advocate for the piece and for bringing Wright State in to be part of that team. And I certainly wouldn't have had the wherewithal to try to make that happen. And I appreciate that you did, and that you allowed us to be part of that journey.
Well, it was an honor to do. And I mean, you said exactly what I feel, which is that it's I think it's one of the best things I ever did. And I think about it fondly all the time. You can't see it from where I'm sitting, but I have the big poster up on the wall, up just right catty corner from the bedroom. I walk by it all the time and sometimes see it with everybody's signatures on it. And I got so moved because I was filming an introduction to the interview I did with John Mauceri talking about the Yale production, and I filmed the little introduction that I stuck on the beginning of that at my piano, and I had to put the vocal score up there and also my orchestra score, and I opened the orchestra score and I'd forgotten that people had written messages on the first few pages of the score, and I teared up, and it was like, oh my God, I forgot that. I mean, it was a very special and emotional experience, and plus I had the really unique opportunity to experience it twice. Once as a player, sitting in the pit in the orchestra with the whole thing swirling around me, and that was just an incredibly moving experience. I mean, I had chills at the end of every performance, and I don't think I actually cried in the pit, but it was pretty close because it was a very powerful and emotional experience. And then through all of you, I got to relive it in a completely different way as the conductor for it, which was even more of an amazing and wonderful trip. So I thank you all for the experience that you allowed me to have, but us all to share. And it's fun to think back on it. And yeah, if someone said you want to do it again, I would say, yeah, where and when, I'll clear my calendar. Let's do it.
Mass is ended. Go in peace.